Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over some colder temperatures that could possibly form up in the northern half of the country due to the La Nina. We're going to be covering the La Nina and what impacts it'll have on the United States, especially for November, December, January, and February. So we're going to mainly be covering the temperature pattern, not so much the precipitation in today's video, but we're mainly going to be covering whether it'll be colder or warmer than normal. We're also going to take a look at some of the oscillations like the NAO, the AO, the PNA, things like that to give you a good idea of what we should be expecting, especially in the shorter term. So this is going to be a fun video to make. It's going to have a ton of information, so make sure you are staying tuned all the way until the end. Before we get into it, I just want to say that if you have any questions or comments, just leave them down below and I'll be responding within a couple hours of you posting that. And then if you have any special requests, anything that you want to contact me personally about, or if you have any weather photos that you want to have featured on the channel, just send them over to that email address right there. And there's a fairly good shot that if you send in your weather photos, that they'll be featured in one of the videos. So let's get into it and let's start off with the watches and warnings. You can see that we do have some winter weather advisories in parts of Nevada and California. We have some actually frost advisories in the southern Appalachians of North Carolina. So they are getting down into the 30s for today, upper 30s mostly, but still something that is interesting. We haven't seen too many days where it's got down into the 30s, especially if you live somewhere within this area right here. So it's been rather warm recently, but we're gonna see a couple days where it is gonna turn a bit colder into these areas before eventually warming up once again. But it looks like after that warm up, we'll actually have another spell of colder air, and we're going to cover that more on the channel in the next couple of videos. Wind advisories also for parts of the west, and then in Montana we have a couple red flag warnings. Yesterday we had a high temperature of 95 degrees in San Bernardino, California, and we had a low temperature of 5 degrees in Peter Sinks, Utah. The highest rainfall report was in Brownsville, Texas, where they got 3.88 inches of rain, and there were no snowfall reports as of yesterday. So here's what the current sea surface temperature anomalies look like. Now the ENSO region is generally from right here to right there. So from the coast of South America to just west of Hawaii is where you have that ENSO region, and that's where we track it. And you can see that this entire area is dealing with below normal sea surface temperatures, which is a signifier of some La Nina conditions. And we're actually not even just maybe a degree below normal. We're actually nearing 2 degrees below normal in a few of these spots. So overall, we're only about a degree below normal. But if you were to look at some of these individual pockets, we have much colder temperatures, especially on the northern end of the ENSO region. So that's something that's interesting and that will have a big effect on the weather pattern. If we look at this cool animation that the that NOAA put out talking about the sea surface temperatures, or the actual just the sea temperatures over certain depths. So for example, on the right hand side of your screen you can see how far deep or how deep this this layer of water is. So 400 feet down, and you can see that we do have some rather chilly temperatures, and it's showing you over what area that's also happening. So we're dealing with the entire area of colder air pushing a little bit further to the west, not by a lot, but also strengthening, especially below the surface. So when you see all the La Nina graphs, you're going to see that it's only covering that top layer of the ocean. But when you go actually lower down, you can see that we definitely have a La Nina developing, and some of that may actually come to the surface over the next few weeks. So that could intensify the La Nina that we currently already have. Now, here's a look at the sea surface temperatures over certain areas. So, the Nino 1+2 region, that's going to be right off of South America. That's the only area that currently would actually be above normal, but very minorly. So, we're not dealing with anything that's super far above normal. But every single other region, the Nino 3 region, which is this red area right here, the Nino 4 region, which is this blue one, the Nino 3.4, which is the area within that black box, all of these areas are below normal. Now, normally we look at the Nino 3.4 for the main indicator of whether we're in a La Nina or an El Nino or an ENSO neutral. But in this case, you kind of want to look at all of them. There's no set area where this is going to be affecting the United States and this area won't. You really want to look at the whole area. The only area that I don't look at too much is the Nino 1+2. It doesn't have a ton of effects on the weather pattern in North America, simply because it's such a small area. But I really do look at anything from the Nino 3 to the Nino 4. But you're going to see that a lot more people are going to mention the 3.4 area. That's the most used out of pretty much any ENSO area. And that area is actually currently right around half a degree, maybe 3/4 of a degree below normal as of right now. So if we look at the upper ocean heat anomalies, so you can see this is 4 areas that are actually below the surface of the ocean, but only by a few feet, a few hundred feet. So nothing that's crazy below down, but this is maybe up to 100 feet below the surface, and you're looking at temperatures down there, maybe even a degree and a half below normal. So that would be a moderate La Nina right there. It looks like we do have subsurface temperatures that are much colder than the actual surface temperatures. So that's something that's interesting, and it will definitely play a role in it, just because on the surface it's maybe just a couple tenths of a degree below normal. When it's below the surface, it still does have an effect on the weather pattern, and especially as we get later on into November, I think a lot more of that is going to come to the surface and have even a bigger role on the weather pattern. Here's a look at the chances in percent of seeing a La Nina, and then of course to what degree. So here's the La Nina El Nino line. If you're to the right of there, that's the chances of an El Nino. To the left, that's the chances of a La Nina, and you can see that the chances are going to be highest within these two first columns. So there's a fairly good shot that we're at least a degree below a degree Celsius below normal, and that would be for the main winter months. All of those areas have a fairly solid chance of being in a La Nina. We only have a 1% chance towards March and April that we get out into a El Nino, but the rest is all the chances of having a La Nina. So the chances of a La Nina are very, very high as of right now. If we look at this graph, you can see that the next closest chance would be of an ENSO neutral, which either way, both of them would indicate colder temperatures for the east. But even that's at a 5 to 10% risk. If we look at the rest of it, it's all up around 85 to 90% chance of a La Nina. So really, until the springtime, we don't even see the El Nino even become closer to the picture. We're not really even dealing with the threat of an El Nino until then. So that's definitely something that you want to pay attention to. It looks like this La Nina is going to stay around for pretty much the entire winter, maybe even lingering into the spring months. So let's take a look at some of the oscillations. Now, this is going to be more shorter term. What we were looking at before, that was longer term. I didn't talk about this before, but a La Nina, if you don't know, would generally indicate above normal precipitation for the Northwest, and also for the Ohio Valley. So that could come in the form of rain or snow. Generally, it would make the northern third of the country a little bit colder, and then also a little bit colder also into areas like the Ohio Valley and the eastern United States. And then you would have some warmer temperatures over the south and also the southwest, where you might be a little bit above normal with some drier conditions. So that's generally what a La Nina looks like, and we're going to talk about what the temperature pattern would look like in a typical La Nina over the next few minutes. So we're looking at the North Atlantic Oscillation. This is the area just south of Greenland, and it's showing you whether that area is seeing below normal heights or above normal heights. And right now we are below normal, so we're in a negative NAO pattern, which is favorable for colder temperatures in the eastern United States. This kind of white dot area right here, this is the forecasted track, and then all these gray lines are the previous forecast. So right now this is the current forecast of the NAO. You can see that we're expecting this to maybe reach its lowest over the next day or so, and then it should push up maybe closer to neutral, stay around neutral, and then dip down as we start to get into November down below the 0 line. So That's something really important because we're going into one of the colder months of the year. November, December, January, February, generally the 4 coldest months. So instead of having this negative NAO in October, which really, if it was a negative NAO, a fairly deep negative NAO for much of October, that would probably mean that it would rise up during November, because you can't really sustain a negative NAO for more than 6 weeks at a time. So the fact that we're getting that negative NAO to start off in November means that that might carry through the first half of December, so at least. So that would be a fairly good sign if you like cold and snow in the east. Now the NAO stopped at around about 2 degrees or 2 standard deviations below the mean. Now this is where the NAO was, and if we look at the AO, this one is also going to be fairly far down there. Now you would want the AO to be negative. This is the Arctic oscillation, because it basically means that you have the polar vortex in the Arctic Circle being a little bit more erratic and a little bit all over the place. So it is dipping down into either Siberia and Europe, or it's also dipping down into North America. So you would want to see the polar vortex not really kind of coop up into the Arctic Circle, because that means that it's going to be so strong that it can't move. No disturbance is really going to make it move down into the United States, and therefore it would be fairly warm without really a supply of cold air. But when you have a negative AO, that indicates that you have a little bit more sporadic activity up in the Arctic Circle, and that would indicate that you could see some of that cold air dip down into the United States. And we see that pretty much the same exact timing as with the NAO, this is dipping down. So all of the signs so far are indicating that we could see a fairly good November in terms of cold and snow. If we look at the PNA pattern, the Pacific North American pattern, which covers the western half of North America, probably the western third of North America actually, and also into the eastern Pacific, and you can see that for the past few weeks it's been way below normal, way below that zero line. And that was when, if you remember, we had very warm temperatures in the eastern 2/3, and then we had all that snow, all that cold out in the west. Well, now that it's actually starting to get a little bit chillier in the east, you can see that now we're going into a positive PNA. So it has a pretty much direct correlation with the weather pattern. Now, the reason that's happening is because when you have, let's say, high pressure over the west, typically you're going to have low pressure over the east. So the PNA, when it's positive, indicates that you have drier and warmer pressure due to rising temperatures in that area. So when it's above normal, it's indicating that you have some semblance of high pressure within that region. And in a normal instance, when you have high pressure over the west, you're going to have the opposite in the east. So it ends up being usually colder than normal in the east when you have a positive PNA. And you can see that with a couple of exceptions, maybe around the 25th or so, it looks like we're going to stay positive throughout this entire time, even through the start of November. So every single sign is indicating that we could be actually fairly cold and potentially snowy for the eastern half of the country as we get into November, which is going to be when you want the cold air. You want to start the cold air in November. You don't want it in September and October, because most areas don't see snow over that time anyways. Now, here's what a La Nina looks like under a few different conditions. So let's start off with that top row. This is showing you just in every single La Nina what you would normally see in each month. So December, you would typically have a colder pattern in the east with warmer temperatures for the west and the southern United States. Then as we get into January, we see the west get much colder, as well as the northern plains, and the same thing applies for February, where it's fairly cold over these areas. But when we look at the negative NAO, when we have a negative NAO, which is this middle column right here, you can see that it completely changes. So for December, with a negative NAO and a La Nina, which is what we're actually looking at right now, this is probably one of the more likely things to happen, where we have a negative NAO and a La Nina for December, or at least for the first half of December. And you can see it's way below normal for much of the eastern 2/3 of the country. It gets warmer out in the west, but for the east, very, very cold, and that would correlate with a ton of snow for those areas as well. January, with a negative NAO, pretty much the entire country sees below normal temperatures, but especially so for the northern and eastern United States. States. And then we see for February with a negative NAO, still cold for everywhere except for the southeast, but the predominant cold air is into the west. So it's interesting how this sets up, where every single month it's something different. In January, it's for pretty much the entire country. For February, mainly for the west. And for December, it's mainly for the east. So I think we're going to have a front-heavy winter for November, December, and maybe early January. And then as we get to February, I think it might kind of cool off a little bit, and we might start to see the West get in on a little bit more of the action. And if we look at the positive NAO, really, that would have the exact opposite effect. So you would have the West for December being fairly cold, with the rest of the country being a blowtorch. For January, you would have the West being cold as well, and the rest of the country being very, very warm. And then you would see the same exact thing for February. So overall, it looks like a negative NAO is going to be the best bet if you live in the eastern United States. You would want to see that negative NAO. It's really a stark difference between when you have a positive or a negative NAO. This is going to be one of the biggest things that's going to determine how the winter goes along. I think we're going to see both of them this winter. It's very rare that you don't see any instance of negative NAO or positive NAO. I think we're going to see both of them. I would say positive NAO probably more likely towards the end of the winter, so February and January mainly, and then I think towards November and December, much more likely that we're going to be in a negative NAO. So that might be one of the best times for snow if you live in the eastern half of the country. And so yeah, that would definitely be very, very interesting. And we're only a couple weeks away, I would say probably 2 weeks away, from seeing snow over the eastern United States. So I'll be tracking that. If we do get any snow anywhere east of the Rockies, I'll definitely have some snowfall maps up for those. And even if it does happen in the Rockies or in the west, I'll also have videos covering that. I might not have snowfall forecast because the elevation does make it very, very hard to draw up a map, but I'll definitely have some videos covering that if that does happen. So if you have any questions or comments, leave a comment down below. If you have any suggestions, or you have anything that you want to email me about, send an email over to the email address in the bottom of the description. And also, if you have any weather photos, send those over to the email address as well, and I'll probably feature that photo in the video. So that is going to wrap it up, and I'll see you guys in tomorrow's video. Goodbye.